How's it going, everybody? This is an impromptu episode of Josh's Car Corner. So, some friends of mine in Australia got in touch with me recently and were asking me what's going on with the EPA and this RPM Act. And I had another friend reach out to me a couple months ago and ask me my thoughts on the thing, and I wasn't really paying attention to it, but all of a sudden, the internet and YouTube in particular has become awash with people writing, complaining they're getting letters and they're getting fines from the EPA and this, that, and the other. So I thought I would take some time to give my thoughts on the whole thing. And since it has to do with the environment, I thought I'd come to a really serene setting in San Diego here and talk about it. So there's a lot of misinformation going on right now about all of this. The first thing you need to understand is that the RPM Act is an act that people like me and regular Americans are promoting to help protect some of the overreach of the EPA. The problem is this new legislation is going too far, and it's saying you can't modify a car that's only going to be used for off-road use or racing purposes and eliminate its emission systems either. This doesn't just apply to vehicles that are driven on the road, they're trying to apply it to vehicles that are driven off the road. And people think that's an overreach. I tend to agree, that is an overreach. If you're building a vehicle that's never going to be driven on the road again, you should be able to do whatever you want with it because it's not being used on the road. But this legislation that is causing all these people to get these audits and get these letters saying cease and desist, and you're going to get fined for what you've been doing. There's people running around saying, oh, this is Democratic liberalism going all over and it's all the Democrats' fault. It's not. This legislation was crafted under President Trump's EPA legislation, and it was enacted while he was in office. People started getting their letters while he was still president. It was all crafted by his guy and his act, and what they were trying to do is clarify language that had always existed. During Obama administration in 2015, there was a clean air initiative, and they tried to put in language to say that it is illegal to have tamper with emission systems and put defeat devices on vehicles. This all came after what happened with Volkswagen and their diesel scandal. They were going to say, well, no one's ever going to cheat like that again. So that's where it all came from. But people saw that the language seemed to apply to vehicles that would also be driven off-road or racing vehicles. Now back then, the EPA tried to clarify the language and say this only applies to vehicles that will be used on public roads. This does not apply to off-road vehicles. But people didn't understand it, or they were still upset that the language was there, so the language was taken out, and it wasn't a problem. But then in 2020, Trump's administration and his EPA decided they were going to re-clarify the language, and they put it back in and said, there will be no defeat devices, you will not remove emissions from any vehicle, period. And it didn't have a stipulation that exempted off-road only vehicles. So that's where this all comes from. So now people are getting their audit letters. People have been getting calls from the EPA saying you're going to get fined, you're going to get this, that, and the other, you're going to have to pay, you must cease and desist modifying vehicles. And by the way, the two websites are YouTube channels I've now seen where these guys are complaining that they're getting these letters and getting fines. They publicly went out there and said, hey, we'll take the emission systems off your car. One was modifying like Hondas or something and taking the cats and the exhaust systems off, which car modifiers do, and people just on their own do that. But then they don't go on YouTube and brag about it or say, hey, this is a service we'll provide, pay me money and I'll do this for you. The other one, and I just got watching it, was a diesel performance shop for diesel pickup trucks. And I'm sorry, no way are all the vehicles you work on only off-road vehicles. They're people's trucks that they drive on the road every day. And you're publicly saying, hey, we'll take the DPF and the emission systems off the truck, pay us money, we'll do this for you. Of course you're going to get that letter with this legislation. Even if that legislation wasn't crafted, you shouldn't be promoting on YouTube that you do that. Of course you're going to get found out. I mean, seriously. So that's really what it boils down to. Now, again, the RPM Act is trying to protect our racing culture, our racing heritage, off-road vehicles. We should be allowed, if we're going to take a car and turn it just into a race car, we should be allowed to take the emission systems off of it. There are no rules that say that if a vehicle is not driven on the public road, it needs to have these emission systems. So that's what the RPM Act is set out to do. I'm going to sign it. If you believe in grassroots motorsport and racing, you should sign it too. It doesn't roll back all legislation and say that we're allowed to keep modifying our vehicles that we're going to use on the public roads and take off the emission systems. If you're into motorsport like I am, you got to sign it. We have to protect motorsport. But most of the people who are complaining about it, again, they're actively removing emission systems from vehicles that are on the public road. They're advertising it. They're making a profit off of doing it. That's, in my opinion, not right. So, you know, I'm sure people are going to disagree with me on this and feel one way or another. And I know there's a lot of people that want to blame this person or that person for the whole thing happening. Well, hopefully now you know this is why this is happening. We do need to sign the RPM Act if we want to keep our motorsport and be able to keep building race cars, have Lemons cars, have cars that are just drag cars. We need that. We need to bring that stipulation back. And I think it will come back. I think enough people will sign legislation that will happen. It's unfortunate that it got put in there, but again, that's what happens when you put policy people in charge that don't understand how to craft policies. That's all I'm going to say about it. So anyway, I hope this has brought some perspective to the whole argument for you. So my 2 cents on it. So I'll see you guys later.